Receive my greetings and welcome to the lesson. We will continue with the chapter on citizen participation and development planning. In today's session, we're going to study the legal framework for public participation. And in looking at the legal framework for public participation, we are going to study what the Constitution says about public participation and the legislative provisions. So let's begin with the Constitution. Constitution of Kenya. Constitution of Kenya. Now, the Constitution of Kenya that was promulgated in 2010 revolutionized the legal landscape of public participation in the country, and it enshrines public participation as a national value and principle of governance, making it a fundamental right for every citizen. In this lesson, we'll highlight some of the key constitutional provisions on public participation. The first provision is Article 10. Article 10 of the Constitution highlights the importance or the need for public participation. Public participation in Article 10 is listed as one of the national values and principles of governance, binding all stakeholders and all the officials, government officials. You understand? Public participation is listed as one of the national values and principles of governance. Lists public participation as one of the national values and principles Article 10 of the Constitution lists public participation as one of the national values and principles, binding all state organs and officials. So public participation in the Constitution of Kenya is a national value and principle. 2, we have the Article 118. Article 118 candidates mandates Parliament to facilitate public participation in the legislative processes and conducts its business in an open manner. Article 118 of the Constitution mandates Parliament to facilitate public participation in legislative processes. Mandates the Parliament to facilitate Parliament to facilitate public participation Article 118 of the Constitution mandates Parliament to facilitate public participation in legislative processes. In legislative processes, and conducts his business in an open manner. Then we have yet another article, that is Article 196. Article 196 requires public participation in the formulation of policies and legislation. Requires public participation in the formulation of policies and legislation. Article 196 requires public participation in the formulation of policies and in formulation of legislation. That is Article 196. Then we have Article 201. Article 201 of the Kenyan Constitution emphasizes public participation in budget making process. Emphasizes public participation in the budget making process. When the budget is being developed, public participation is a key element of that process. Article 201. Article 232 of the Constitution. Article 232 mandates public participation in the functions of state organs and public officers. Mandates public participation in the functions of state organs. Mandates public participation in the functions of state organs and officers. That is Article 232. So these are 6 articles that emphasize the need for public participation. Then we also have the relevant legislative provisions. Relevant legislative provisions. Apart from the Constitution, then we have also Acts of Parliament. Acts of Parliament which emphasize the need for public participation. Now, there are various laws and regulations that operationalize the constitutional provisions on public participation. So the Constitution, we know, gives broad laws or principles, but these principles are then operationalized through legislative provision. So we are going to check some of the acts of parliament that operationalize the provisions of the Constitution. One is the Public Participation Act. The Public Participation Act of 2018. Public Participation Act of 2018. This act provides a comprehensive framework for public participation in decision-making processes across all levels of government. It outlines the principles, the procedures, and also the mechanisms for engaging the public in policy formulation, implementation, and evaluation. That is the Public Participation Act. Number 2, we have the Environmental Management and Coordination Act. The Environmental Management Coordination Act, which mandates public participation in environmental decision making, including environmental impact assessments and the development of environmental policies and plans. 3, County Governments Act. The County Government Act requires county governments to facilitate public participation in county planning and development processes. The County Government Act of 2012, this one is 1999. 4, we have the Access to Information Act. Access to Information Act. The Access to Information Act of 2016 enables citizens to access information held by public bodies, which is essential for informed participation in decision making. You understand? Access to Information Act enables citizens to access information that is held by public bodies, and this information is essential for informed participation in decision making. So these are just one of the 4 relevant legislative provisions. There are many other laws that promote public participation, like the Urban Areas and Cities Act, the Physical Planning Act, the Water Act. All these legislative provisions encourage participation of the public in public matters. So, broadly speaking, that is the legal framework for public participation. We began by looking at the provisions of the Constitution on public participation, beginning with Article number 10, which lists participation as one of the national values and principles. Article 118 of the Constitution mandates Parliament to facilitate public participation in legislative processes. Article 196 requires public participation in the formulation of policies and legislation. Article 201 emphasizes public participation in the budget making process. Article 232 of the Constitution mandates the public to participate in the functions of state organs and officers. All right. Then we have relevant legislative provisions, beginning with the Public Participation Act, the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, the County Governments Act, the Access to Information Act, the Water Act, the Physical Planning Act, the Urban Areas and Cities Act, and so on. Here is your today's assignment. Assignment on legal framework for public participation. 1. How does the Constitution of Kenya 2010 enshrine the right to public participation, and what are the key constitutional provisions that support this right? 2. What are the main provisions of the Public Participation Act 2018, and how does it operationalize the constitutional right to public participation? 3. What are some of the challenges in implementing the legal framework for public participation in Kenya, and what steps can be taken to address them? 4. How can the legal framework for public participation be strengthened to ensure that it is meaningful, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of all citizens? That is your today's assignment. Bye.